In ancient Rome, it was common for the upper class to throw leftover food on the floor during banquets, leaving slaves to pick up the scraps. Hello everyone, I'm Chris. Today, we're diving deep into the often harsh and complex lives of slaves in ancient Rome. Uncovering some surprising facts along the way, we'll look at who became slaves, the jobs they did, and how they were treated. We'll also delve into some surprising facts about the Roman Empire's relationship with slavery. If you find this video interesting, please support us by hitting the like button. Now, let's get started. While modern society views slavery as a cruel and inhumane practice, it was considered a normal part of life in ancient Rome. According to an article in the British Museum, it is estimated that 10% to 20% of the population at that time were slaves. In the 1st century, out of the Roman Empire's population of 50 million, between 5 and 10 million were slaves. What kind of people were enslaved, and what kind of life did they lead? Reasons for becoming a slave. Firstly, who were the people that became slaves? There were various reasons. Some were born into slavery, some were orphans who became slaves, and some were poor parents who sold their children to become slaves. Additionally, many slaves were prisoners of war. The Romans collected slaves from all regions, regardless of race. Slaves came from the Balkans, France, Belgium, Carthage, Britain, Syria, North Africa, and many other regions. There were also many Germanic slaves. Slaves were collected from various regions at random. Some people were even so heavily in debt that they sold themselves into slavery. In ancient Rome, owning slaves was a societal norm among citizens. In contrast, modern markers of wealth include luxury cars, expensive watches, and political influence. In ancient Rome, the number of slaves one owned was a key indicator of wealth and power. How much did slaves cost, which was considered a symbol of wealth? And at what price were slaves bought and sold? Slave prices varied widely according to gender, age, and skill. The 1st to the 3rd century, the average price of a slave with no or moderate skills was about 2,000 sestertii. As for the money situation at the time, the salary for a Roman infantryman was 900 sestertii per year, while a military commander was 15 times that amount, or 13,500 sestertii. A military commander could buy a slave for a short period of time, if he saved up enough money for a few months. Incidentally, in the case of senators, the highest body in Rome, they were elected from the very wealthy and aristocratic class and were a lifelong entity. To become a senator, one had to have 1 million sestertii, so they were able to hire a large number of slaves. Incidentally, the Roman emperor owned nearly 20,000 slaves. Slave work. You might be wondering what kinds of jobs slaves in ancient Rome had. The roles were incredibly varied, encompassing nearly all forms of labor. One unexpected occupation is that of a gladiator. Fighting in the arena or with wild animals enthralled the Romans. Most gladiators were enslaved people, criminals, or prisoners of war. In some cases, bankrupt nobles were forced to participate. Initially, slaves were purchased by the owners of gladiatorial schools. In the training schools, there was a hierarchical system in which they competed with their peers to improve themselves. However, the role of gladiators evolved in the 1st century, gaining immense popularity. These fights began to attract not just slaves, but also upper-class aristocrats and knights eager to showcase their skill. Eventually, even the Roman emperor became a gladiator. The Roman Emperor Commodus. Commodus gained fame for his thrilling battles and attracted a large audience. He could easily defeat his opponents in battle as a gladiator. Commodus was so enthralled by the arena that he fought 735 times as a gladiator. According to later records, this was actually a submission because his opponents knew he was emperor, not because he was a true gladiator. In addition to being a gladiator, another rare job for a slave was, for example, a nomenclator. They gave the names of party attendees to their masters, preventing the masters from being embarrassed by forgetting their names or titles. Some also worked as poisoners for the emperor. As the number of poisonings in Rome had been increasing since the 1st century BCE. Now among slaves with skills were valued. They were sometimes hired as teachers or doctors. Others were hired as cooks in the homes of wealthy Romans to take care of their masters. However, slaves with no skills were forced to work in the mines or fields. Their living conditions were poor and they were in danger of death. What was life like in the harsh mines? Enslaved people were forced to work without rest in deep, dark mines that were in danger of collapse. The work was perilous both physically and mentally. The 1st century BC, historian Gladiators wrote, "The slaves who worked in the mines were the mainstay of the city. The slaves who work in the mines toil unimaginably for the income of their masters. But they themselves dig day and night, their bodies worn out, and they die in great numbers due to extreme suffering. With no rest or respite, they are forced to endure harsh conditions, making death seem preferable to life." Crazy parties. Parties for the Romans were a symbol of status and a social occasion. The host had to entertain the guests with the best performance. What kind of feast was served there? The meat course alone included suckling pig, wild boar, thin slices of deer meat, nuts, hare, thrush, tangers, and even monkeys, flamingos, and frogs. So much food, you would think it would be too much to eat, right? Despite the abundance of food, Romans had a unique method to continue eating. They made room for more. They would recline on couches and beds, eating food prepared and served by slaves. When they were full, they tickled the back of their throats with their feathers, vomited, and continued eating their feasts. Slaves were responsible for cleaning up, whether it was vomit or food scraps discarded on the floor. In addition to the sumptuous meals at the private parties, there was a variety of entertainment: poetry readings, music, theater, and sometimes the slaves were even involved in disreputable interactions with the ladies of the night, the emperor's favorite slaves. Although Emperor Nero committed atrocities against the multitude, removing anyone who got in his way and terrorizing many, he had a young slave whom he loved. It is said that when his wife scolded him for coming home late, Nero kicked her to death when she was pregnant. Later, he met a beautiful young man, Sporus, who was said to have been a slave and who looked exactly like his wife. To Nero's surprise, he immediately fell in love. It is said that he did this to ease his guilt over his wife. Nero freed Sporus from slavery and even had him castrated. Nero then dressed Sporus in women's clothing and made her appear in public as his wife. Sporus was treated as though he were Nero's lawful spouse, appearing in public in women's clothing. Their relationship, however, was short-lived, coming to an abrupt end due to a rebellion in Gaul. When Nero heard about it, he said that he could restore peace by simply appearing and singing. Nero loved to sing in public and perform poems. However, Nero was later declared an enemy of the state by the Senate, and when he realized that it was over, he took his own life. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more insightful content. Take care and see you in the next video. Goodbye!